At Camp Pendleton, there's a story that still makes its way around the mess hall each year. The kind where guys lower their voices without knowing why. It's about two Marines on a nothing shift who came back acting like everything was fine, except everyone around them could tell it wasn't. They filed their reports, checked their boxes, played it cool. But whatever they saw that night, nobody's ever gotten the full version until now. And the way the chain of command handled it, that's the part that keeps people up. So hang on tight, because things are about to get real dicey. I never planned to talk about what we found that night at Pendleton, but every time the house settles, I think it's one of those things scratching around the vents, and my chest tightens like I'm back in that hallway. Writing this down is the only way I've managed to stay calm long enough to sleep, so I'm just going to spill what happened, boring parts and all, because that's how real life works. Back in July of 2019, I was a corporal attached to a maintenance platoon. Nothing glamorous, just gear checks, generator repairs, and driving people where they needed to go. We'd wrapped a 3-week joint exercise with the National Guard unit, and morale was tank level low. Everybody else got weekend liberty, but our detail pulled base utility watch, which meant driving a white box truck around the back roads of Pendleton, looking for broken light poles and other problems that needed to be addressed. My partner on the night crew was Lance Corporal Devin Ortiz. Devin was the definition of laid back, always humming old pop songs, always carrying a notebook full of sketchy ideas for a t-shirt brand he swore would make him rich. We'd cruise the empty service roads drinking coffee that turned my stomach, talking about plans for when our contracts were up. It was routine until that one fateful shift. It was a Thursday. The heat had finally broken, and low clouds hung over the hills. Around midnight, we got a work order to check erratic power in a fenced utility shed out past the old air station. I'd never seen the code for that building, and on the base map it looked like a leftover World War II bunker that nobody used. Still, the ticket came from facilities, so off we went. The shed sat halfway up a canyon, hidden by brush that hadn't been trimmed in years. The chain-link gate was locked, but the padlock was new, bright silver against rusted metal. The weird part was the keypad next to it, brand new, glowing blue numbers. Nothing on Pendleton gets an upgrade that fast, unless it's something brass once kept quiet. We radioed dispatch for the access code, but they acted like we were making up the job number. The corporal on the desk even joked that maybe we'd won a scavenger hunt. We were about to bag it when Devin noticed the keypad already flashed green, like somebody had buzzed us in. He shrugged, slid the gate back, and we drove the truck inside. The shed door itself had no knob, only another keypad and a handle with a fingerprint reader. No one said we had clearance for any of that. I should have called a supervisor, but night shift runs on a mix of boredom and curiosity. We both pressed fingers to the reader. It stayed red. Devin laughed, said, "Guess we're not special," and tugged the handle anyway. The door popped open. Inside was a bare concrete corridor sloping underground, lit by half-dead fluorescent tubes that flickered like a cheap horror movie set. The air tasted like old pennies and machine oil. We walked in because the ticket mentioned electrical faults, and electrical faults were our lane. The door clicked shut behind us, which felt very wrong, but we figured it was spring-loaded. 10 steps in, we found a rolling cart parked against the wall. On it sat half-empty bottles of IV saline, disposable gloves, and a field tablet, screen still glowing with a form labeled Specimen Vitals. Devin's eyes got huge. He said, "Are we in medical?" But there were no signs. No Red Cross, nothing. Farther down, the corridor split. One path sloped deeper. The other led to a door marked Receiving. We heard a motor humming behind that door, like an industrial fridge. The air coming from the seam was refrigerated cold, and it carried a smell that reminded me of wet dog and copper wiring. We looked at each other. This wasn't maintenance, but if you look like you belong, people rarely question you. So we pushed through. The room was a loading bay, roller tables, sealed crates, and a freight elevator at the far wall. The crates were stamped with long barcodes and stenciled BIO-ASSET in sober black letters. Not Army, not Navy, just that. Devin knelt by a crate and traced a fresh boot scuff on the lid. I popped a hand truck off the rack, pretending to inspect wheels while deciding if we should bail. That's when the elevator dinged. We froze. The doors parted and two men rolled a gurney out. The gurney carried a cage, and inside the cage was a creature that didn't fit any picture I've ever seen. Think of a slumped bear the size of a large man, except its limbs were too long and its fur was patchy, like it had been shaving itself with broken glass. Its head was down, but one arm reached through the bars, and its fingers were almost human. Long-knuckled dark nails curved like spoons. An IV line was taped to its shoulder. The men wore plain brown coveralls with an emblem of 3 overlapping triangles. One read a handheld scanner, checked his watch, and said, "Oxygenation stable. Move." No rank, no sir. They walked right past us, but I could tell when they realized we didn't belong. One slowed, turned, and asked, "Which team are you?" Devin answered, cool as ice, "Night systems check." The man stared, then just kept walking. We knew we were in big trouble. The elevator stayed open, so we stepped in like we'd planned it. Inside, the panel had 3 buttons: B2, B3, and an unmarked key switch. B2 was lit. We let it carry us down. Doors opened onto a hallway lined with observation windows. Beyond the glass were rooms painted surgical white. Some rooms had treadmills big enough for livestock. Others had water tanks. Others obstacle courses built from tree trunks and steel bars. And in each room was a creature like the one we'd seen. Some bigger, some smaller. Fur colors from charcoal to reddish brown. All with that same too-long limb proportion. Everyone wore a collar with blinking LEDs. A soft alarm pinged overhead. Nothing urgent, more like a reminder chime. Lights shifted from white to yellow. Speakers crackled. All handlers condition Beta 4, begin sedation protocols. Doors at the far end hissed open, and more handlers in brown coveralls filed out, pushing carts loaded with steel canisters and syringes thick as broom handles. Devin mouthed, "We should leave." But the handlers were between us and the elevator. I spotted a door marked Systems and pulled him with me. Thankfully, it was unlocked. The systems room felt normal. Servers, breaker panels, big industrial batteries. My maintenance badge finally made sense. I tugged open a metal cabinet and pretended to record voltage while Devin explored. He whispered that he'd found a control console still logged in. A text menu listed each enclosure with real-time vitals, heart rate, oxygen, cortisol. 38 living specimens, 8 tagged on ice. He opened a folder called Field Reports. One dated 3 days earlier. Specimen 27 captured near Mount Hood. Displays cooperative behavior. Accelerated muscle regeneration after laceration tests. Another. Specimen 12 expired during stress trial. Cause, cardiac rupture. Tissue samples archived. The calm of those sentences made me nauseous. We copied everything onto Devin's thumb drive. He carried one because of his t-shirt designs. That saved our sanity later. The longer we hid, the more we noticed a low rhythmic sound under the machinery noise. A wet, labored breathing echoing through the ventilation ducts. The ducts above the ceiling were oversized, like they'd been built for bigger lungs than ours. A klaxon started up deeper and faster than the earlier chime. Corridor lights flipped to red. An automated voice said, "Containment breach, Sector B3. That was our floor. My body went so cold my fingernails hurt. Devin yanked me toward a service hatch beside the batteries. He'd spotted it earlier. He pulled the latch, but it wouldn't budge. We dragged a rolling ladder over, climbed, and kicked the latch until it popped. We squeezed inside and found ourselves crouching on a catwalk running alongside the ventilation trunk. A heat sensor strobed orange further down. Someone else was on the catwalk. We killed our flashlights. Below us, handlers darted around, hurting something enormous that lashed out with those spoon-shaped claws. Some shouted, "Keep the light on its eyes." No cracking shots, only the hiss of compressed gas and metal clanging. The creature rammed a handler, sending him into a wall so hard I felt the vibration. He stood after, so nobody got hurt, but the fear was real. We crawled the opposite direction and found another hatch leading to a stairwell. While we wrestled it open, a hard thump shook the catwalk behind us. One of the creatures had smashed through a service door and was half inside the duct, glaring up, nostrils flaring. In that moment, I understood what prey feels. Devin kicked the hatch loose, and we dropped into the stairwell, slamming it behind us. The stairwell went up one flight before ending at a locked door. Handle needed a card. Devin pulled a multi-tool, cracked the plastic cover, and jammed 2 wires. Sparks flew, the door clicked. We burst into another hallway that looked like standard office space. Tan walls, corkboards, carpet smelling of stale coffee. At the far end was a break room where a cleaning woman in earbuds mopped the floor, oblivious, or maybe just trying to stay in her own lane. We tried to act like we belonged, nodded hello, and she just nodded back. We kept walking until we reached a lobby with glass doors to the outside. Freedom was 20 feet away. We stepped out into salt air and heard waves, realized we'd surfaced near the beach. Probably San Onofre Beach, but nowhere near the canyon where we started. The bunker must run for miles. Black SUVs rolled in fast, engines humming like electric carts. Drivers wore suits, not uniforms. We dove into bushes and let them pass. Each SUV hauled an empty cage trailer. Any soldier knows when a scene is above their pay grade. We headed north along the beach, climbed rocks until we reached a familiar stretch near the rental cabins, then used an emergency phone to call the duty van. We said our truck broke down by the air station. Safer to be found with a lame truck than near whatever op we'd stumbled into. Back at the motor pool, our supervisor chewed us out for disappearing off comms. But paperwork can cover sins if you know which boxes to tick. We claimed the power fault was a false alarm. The ticket vanished from the system by morning. Devin spent the next day combing the thumb drive behind the maintenance cage. Logs dated back 6 years. Funding memo came from something called Joint Applied Species Program, JASP. Goals were listed as adaptability metrics and covert terrain infiltration. Costs broken down by specimen, capture, transport, enclosure. Each creature had a unique DNA code. Species field was blank. The more we read, the clearer it got. Somebody was training these things. Test notes mentioned silent movement, obedience conditioning. One line set a success threshold. Responds to hand signals within 3-meter range. My skin crawled at the thought of those animals learning human cues. We decided to report it, not because we thought it would change anything, but because it felt like the box you check when you stumble into something you weren't supposed to. Paperwork shields you when the questions come later. So we went to the battalion executive officer under the excuse of possible safety violation. Kept it dry, no dramatic flourishes. He stared at us like we were describing a broken coffee maker. He nodded a lot, acted like we were wasting his time, but took a lot of notes and took our written statement without reading it in front of us, and told us he'd elevate it to the appropriate channels. No follow-up questions, no, what the hell did you see? Just that same official tone of voice that says, you're dismissed. By the end of the day, a tech crew from facilities showed up to check the utility shed we claimed had the fault. Devin and I got reassigned to motor pool detail. Our maintenance reports from that night got flagged, archived due to error. Nobody mentioned it again, and honestly, we didn't push it. We went back to our routine, same coffee, same busted generators, same dumb conversations about t-shirt brands. Nobody came knocking on our doors. No spooky men in suits. They didn't need to. Whatever we walked into wasn't for us to understand. We told the chain, that was our part, and then we shut up. That's it. We wanted to stay alive. So that's all I have. If you hear this and you know someone stationed at Pendleton, tell them to watch for new locks on old doors. Tell them some things aren't worth the curiosity. And if you smell wet fur where it doesn't belong, or if a stranger reminds you to stay disengaged, trust the fear. Usually it's the only alarm you'll get. I wish this felt like closure. But you and I both know that stories like this never really end. I've been working as a caretaker out here in the remains of the old vulture mine site near Wickenburg, Arizona for close to 6 months now, though it feels like forever. The property owners only drop by once every couple of weeks to bring supplies or check in, and the rest of the time I'm basically left alone to watch over these scattered structures and the dried-up terrain. I've taken a liking to exploring the site's ruins and shafts when my duties are done, mostly out of sheer boredom, but there's something about the last few weeks that's changed everything for me. The owners told me about a few sealed-off side tunnels and hidden entrances in passing, more out of curiosity than necessity. Supposedly, they weren't worth investigating because they'd been caved in decades ago or had major structural issues. The mine began operations in the 1860s and changed hands a few times before it was mostly abandoned in the 1940s. You can imagine the labyrinth of tunnels and shafts that built up over nearly a century of digging. I've tried mapping a few of them for my own reference, since some are only partially collapsed and still accessible if you know where to look. Anyway, about a month ago, I came across a small opening behind a crumbled support beam that I'd swear wasn't noticeable before, and this is where things get absolutely strange. I decided to at least peek inside. The first 20 or 30 feet were cramped with fallen timber, rotted boards, and all the usual debris. I was squeezing my way through and just about ready to call it quits when I noticed a cool draft coming from further in. And when you've lived here through the Arizona heat, you get used to how the air typically flows, or doesn't flow, down these shafts. Something about that breeze gave me goosebumps. It was too evenly cool, as if there was an actual ventilation source deeper inside. I kept going, found a drop-off that looked like it had been purposefully carved into the rock. It had smooth, almost polished walls, and after carefully lowering myself, I landed in a more open corridor that definitely wasn't part of the original 19th century digging. It had a slight downward slope. I didn't do much exploring that first day, partly because I was alone and didn't tell anyone where I was. I got spooked not necessarily by anything physical, but by the presence the place gave off. A big part of me felt like I wasn't supposed to be there. I turned around and left, planning to come back with a better flashlight, rope, and some sense of self-preservation. Over the next few days, I thought a lot about it, trying to recall if any of the older folks around town had mentioned hidden expansions to the mine. But no, everything I'd heard was about the standard workings, the big main shafts, nothing about large, almost artificial-like corridors. So about a week later, armed with a better light and some basic climbing gear, I went back in. This time, I followed that sloping corridor for what must have been a couple hundred yards, maybe more. It's hard to gauge distance underground, but it felt like I was going deeper into the foothills behind the official mine site. The weirdest part was the walls, though clearly made of the same rock. They had these subtle carvings or scratch marks that looked geometric in some spots and almost claw-like in others. It's hard to describe. Some lines were curved smoothly, others more angled, but all meticulously spaced. It didn't look like random cracks or weathering. It reminded me of how reptiles sometimes scratch surfaces in terrariums, but on a much larger and more systematic scale. I should mention something else that rattled me. At no point did I feel like I was truly alone down there. Once or twice I thought I heard a faint clicking or scraping noise echo off to my right, maybe in a side passage I hadn't noticed yet. It might have been water dripping or loose rocks, but I couldn't ignore the possibility that I wasn't the only one exploring this place. Let me just say I never believed in reptilian conspiracies or anything outlandish. Before this, my biggest excitement was an occasional UFO story I'd read for entertainment. But I can't shake the vibe that whatever is utilizing these deeper tunnels, if indeed it's being used, isn't human. I nearly lost my nerve when I finally stumbled upon a chamber, roughly circular, big enough to stand in. There were these bizarre stone formations or sculptures lined around the walls. They were maybe knee-high, shaped vaguely like small pillars. They didn't look like any mining equipment or leftover from old dynamite blasts. There was also a smell, musky, kind of stale, like how certain reptile houses in zoos have that distinct odor, except mixed with the odor of wet earth. The air felt thick, and I got the sense that I was intruding on something that's been there for a long time. I spent a solid 5 minutes absorbing every detail: the slight dampness underfoot, the scattered piles of something resembling molted skins, though they were too decayed or tattered to identify precisely. I worried I was seeing snake molts, but they looked way too large for any local species, even the biggest rattlers. Some sections looked like they might be shaped to fit something more humanoid, but I can't confirm that's what they were. My beams of light flickered across them, and the more I tried to piece it together, the more unsettled I became. Sometime after that, I realized I'd been hearing a repeating sound, like a faint tapping that might have been coming from an offshoot tunnel I passed on my way in. When I tried retracing my steps, I got turned around because there were more passages than I initially saw. I had a small moment of panic, thinking I'd never find my climb-out point. That's when I noticed a darker opening that seemed artificially cut, as if some intelligence had carved a neat rectangle into the rock. That, more than anything, freaked me out because it looked like it was done with a precision you don't see in old gold mines from the 19th century. The edges were too perfect. I finally managed to find my rope and get back up to the collapsed portion. The moment I reached daylight, I rushed to my cabin and stayed put, only venturing out for basic caretaker errands and chores for the next several days. Meanwhile, I tried researching other weird stories around Wickenburg, or the Superstition Mountains area. I already knew about some legends of hidden gold, the Lost Dutchman's Mine, and the usual ghost stories, but this tunnel system doesn't match anything I've uncovered so far. The reason I'm sending you this message is that, after sitting on it for so long, I feel like people should at least be aware of these bizarre underground structures. If you were to ask me, I'd say there's a good chance that these elaborate tunnels might be used by something non-human, almost certainly reptilian in nature, based on the environment and the scratched scorch marks along the walls. I can't confirm who or what exactly is in there, if it's reptilians, if that's even the right word, but I know enough to sense it's not abandoned. The caretaker side of me says I should block it off for safety, but there's another part of me that thinks maybe the owners already know something about it. They haven't asked any questions about that section of the property, which is strange because I'd expect them to want updates on any newly discovered hazards, especially ones so deep and dangerous. I'm tiptoeing around this because I don't want to come across as a complete kook, but I figure your YouTube channel covers similar eyewitness accounts. So maybe you've heard of people stumbling into big reptilian hideouts or something close. It just strikes me as too deliberate and hidden to be random. I am half tempted to toss a motion-activated camera down there, but I'm also worried about provoking something. And this may be paranoia. There have been times I've walked the grounds at night, and I get this feeling like something's watching me from the edges of the property. No sign of tracks or footprints. Nothing that any normal person would call evidence. Just these fleeting glimpses of movement in the distance, and an unsettling sense of being observed. When I finally decided to type all this out, I started second-guessing if I should mention the weird marks, or the chamber, or that decaying, molted-looking material. But in the end, I figured if I don't share it, I'll just be stuck with it in my head. And this place is lonely enough as is. I'm trying to act normal around the owners when they do swing by, just so they don't cut off the small income I have out here. But every time they leave, I feel that tug to go back down there, like it's calling me, but also warning me. It's that same push-pull you get when you sense something is beyond your understanding, yet you're compelled to uncover it. Anyway, that's what's been going on. I'm not sure whether to nail boards across that hole or keep it secret. Part of me would love to have someone else confirm I'm not losing it. This all might explain certain local rumors of creatures spotted near old mining shafts. I'd heard a few stories around town, usually brushed off as drunken yarns, about lizard-like figures scurrying around the edges of the desert at dusk. I never gave them a second thought until now. I don't know if I'm the first caretaker to find this place, or if others knew and just kept quiet. All I can say is that if someone does go in there, it might be wise not to go alone, and to be prepared for the possibility you might not be alone in the dark. I'm a traveling nurse who spent the better part of the last 3 years bouncing between clinics in rural parts of the Midwest, especially around North Dakota. I'd been assigned to a small outpatient clinic located between Stanley and Newtown. Technically, it's in Mountrail County, just off Highway 2. The minute I pulled into town with my rental car, I noticed how different everything felt compared to some of my other assignments. The landscape is open and wide, but there's something about it that felt suffocating at night. I originally chalked it up to being new to the area, or the unsettling quiet that seems to blanket the place after sunset. But honestly, I don't think that was it. The clinic is a modest building, pretty basic, with a gravel lot. After hours, you can hear coyotes in the distance, and every so often, you'll see pickup trucks rolling by, headlights sweeping across the fields. We usually lock up around 7 p.m. during the week, but if a patient needs something in a pinch, we'll stay later to finish an IV or do wound care, stuff like that. A few weeks into my assignment, I started hearing strange voices outside the clinic after dark. At first, it was easy to explain away. I thought maybe one of the oil field workers who wander in sometimes was out there, or maybe a trucker had pulled off near the lot. But then I realized these were voices I recognized, or at least partially recognized, like patients I had tended to earlier in the day. One particular night stands out. It was probably around 8:30 p.m., and we had just wrapped up care for a rancher who came in to have his hand looked at. He had a nasty cut from a barbed wire fence on his property near Lund's Valley. He left, and the place was silent except for the hum of the fluorescent lights. I was finishing notes on the system, basically charting his antibiotic prescription. Then I heard a voice outside the window. It sounded so much like the rancher, just kind of moaning and calling out, though not by name, more like the tone and the pitch of it. I can't say for sure, but it was almost as if it was calling for help again. I remember thinking, maybe he forgot something. But when I stepped out with my coworker to check, the parking lot was empty, and the yard light only illuminated a few feet in front of the door. We both shrugged and locked back up, telling ourselves it was the wind or an echo. Sometimes you just rationalize so you can keep moving. But this didn't stop. Every couple of nights, especially on the late shifts, I'd hear these bizarre voices. Sometimes, I could have sworn it was a woman who'd come in a week prior complaining of migraines. At other times, it was like an older man who had needed an inhaler. It was never exactly their voice in a perfect way, but the uncanny similarity was enough to give me chills. I started wondering if I was so tired that I was mixing up my memory with random sounds, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there. Now, let me explain a little about how remote this area is. You get pockets of population around Minot or Williston, but everything in between can be just wide stretches of farmland or quiet roads lined with tall grass. A lot of folks are used to driving 30 or 40 miles just to see a doctor. By 9 p.m., it's completely dark. And on nights when it's overcast, you can't see more than a few feet in front of you without headlights. The wind can whip around and play tricks on your mind, especially near the Missouri River or around Lake Sakakawea. Growing up, I thought places like this would be peaceful, but it's an entirely different kind of quiet. It weighs on you. Anyway, it reached a boiling point when I was scheduled on a Sunday night. Odd shift, but we'd had a few emergencies. We had a patient come in from Plaza, a small community nearby, complaining of stomach pains. He left around 5:45 p.m. After that, I was alone for a short time because our front desk clerk went to pick up dinner from this diner across the highway. I'm trying to keep busy, restocking exam rooms, but I hear footsteps in the hallway, except there's nobody else there. The overhead lights in the hallway were on, and I could have sworn I saw a shadow move past the door to room 3. I called out, but nobody answered. My first logical thought was that the clerk was back, or it was a wandering patient, but the front door was locked. Right as I decided to check, the footsteps, if that's what they were, stopped. Over the next hour or so, I kept hearing scraping sounds against the side of the building, like claws or nails dragging along the siding. I've never heard raccoons make a sound that big, and clearly it wasn't just the wind. Then, at around 7:15 p.m., I heard a voice outside one of the windows facing the parking lot. and it was speaking in a low tone, but it mimicked exactly how one of my frequent patients from White Earth says my name. Now, only a handful of people pronounce my name that way, and he's one of them. In that moment, I felt absolute dread. I texted the clerk to hurry back, then grabbed one of those cheap flashlights from the supply cabinet. I forced myself to step outside. The immediate area was empty, but the tension was so thick, it could have been cut with a knife. You know how sometimes you can just feel something's wrong? The wind died down all of a sudden, and it was still chilly. Late autumn in North Dakota can get below freezing at night. I walked around the back of the building near the dumpsters, and that's when I swear I saw something shift behind a cluster of scrubby bushes. It happened so quickly I can't even properly describe it. Like a deer bolting away, but on two legs, or something low to the ground that stood up. I can't be certain. All I know is that I saw movement, and then it was gone, almost too fast to track with my flashlight beam. After that, I locked myself inside, all the while telling myself I was overreacting. But then, not 2 minutes later, I heard the voice again outside the same window, repeating my name in that same uncannily accurate tone. The clerk finally came back. I must have looked pale because she asked if I was feeling sick. I felt a knot in my stomach and told her I thought there might be a trespasser. She walked around outside as well, found nothing, but she did notice fresh tracks in the dirt, which were definitely not shoe prints. They looked more like hooves or claws, pressed deeply into the mud near the drainage spout. I took pictures on my phone, but to be honest, they just looked like odd holes in the ground. Now, I grew up hearing a few stories about shapeshifters or skinwalkers, mostly from my grandparents who hailed from the Southwest, but I always considered them legends, or something that happened far away from me. I never imagined I'd be connecting weird footprints and disembodied voice mimicry to anything like that. But it truly feels like the only explanation after everything I've experienced here. I talked to a local who helps clean the clinic sometimes, and though she wouldn't come out and say it, she gave me a loaded look when I asked if folks around here report strange sightings or sounds. She mentioned there are stories passed around in hushed conversations, especially closer to the Fort Berthold Reservation, about entities that roam the plains at night, mimicking voices to lure people out. In the following weeks, I'd still hear weird noises, but I made a point of never going out alone again. Another nurse who worked the night shift with me claimed she heard her name called in a raspy voice from the empty hallway. She swore it was the voice of a patient we'd lost to a heart attack earlier in the year, even though she never directly said it to me, just hinted that it sounded awfully familiar. When we asked the clinic's higher-ups about installing better security lighting or cameras, we got pushback, something about budget constraints, the usual runaround. One of the doctors even joked that we probably had an overactive imagination because we're new to the rural lifestyle. But something is definitely off, and I feel like it's being glossed over, either because people don't want to confront it or they don't believe it. I've noticed that since the nights are now getting longer, this sense of unease creeps in earlier in the afternoon. Sometimes we'll have a midday lull, and I'll swear I can hear faint shuffling under the floorboards or in the back near the storage room. The building is old, and I know expansions were added on throughout the years, so it's probably just pipes or the wind sneaking through cracks. It's just hard to separate normal building noises from what I've personally been experiencing. Part of me wonders if I should break contract and request a transfer somewhere else, but a bigger part of me has this twisted curiosity to stick around and figure out what's actually going on. I'm telling you all this because I've followed your YouTube channel long enough to know that you cover these kinds of encounters. I don't have a neat bow to tie this all up with. I haven't seen anything that I can definitively say was a skinwalker's true form. But the mimicry, the plain-as-day voices of people I know, gets under my skin more than any random noise in the night ever could. It's a violation of my sense of comfort in a place that's supposed to be about healing and care. The last time I worked a late shift, I stuck a small handheld voice recorder near the nurse's station in case I heard the voices again. I picked up a faint hum, like a whistle, but nothing concrete. I'm not sure whether to be relieved or disappointed. Maybe part of me wanted proof. All I know is that I can't get the memory of those voices out of my head. If I decide to leave this assignment early, no one will ever know the real reason, because it sounds crazy to tell people you think something that can copy voices, has been haunting the clinic's periphery. But I'm really at a loss.